Hey everybody, welcome back to Startup Happy Hour. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and I'm here today with our guest, Eddy Badrina. Eddy is the CEO of Eden Green Technology, which is a vertical farming technology company. If you have listened to recent episodes, you will remember Sam Norton, who also was in the vertical farming industry. So I'm really excited to have Eddy on here to talk more about vertical farming. This is something that I ended up doing a deep dive into and realized that this is something that's trending. And so really excited to talk to Eddy more about this and how this technology is going to shape our future. So, hey, Eddy, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be on it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll let you start off and tell us a little bit more about what Eden Green Technology is, and maybe give people a little recap in case they didn't listen to the last episode with Sam about what vertical farming is.
Yeah, so Eden Green Technology is it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a technology firm, ag tech to be specific, that's really focused on changing the way that we farm food and that we feed people. We've got a patented hardware and then proprietary software all up in a package in a greenhouse package. We can also put in warehouses and in controlled environment facilities, but it really is a all-in-one package that we want to sell to retailers, grocers, distributors, as well as nonprofits, folks in the cannabis and hemp space, and then governments and municipalities, and really empower them to grow their own greens at scale. And I think that's probably the biggest difference in a lot of things that you see out there is one is we want to empower them. We don't want to own these greenhouses. We want them to own it, them to run it as economic units. And then it's at scale. So it's something where you can feed thousands of people. So, in an acre and a half of a greenhouse, which is our standard module, an acre and a half greenhouse will grow 1 million pounds of leafy greens over the course of a year, 11 to 13 harvests throughout the year. And that is equivalent to 35 traditional farming acres. So just think about 35 acres shrunk all the way down into an acre and a half and then placed almost anywhere in the world, including, an urban environment, in underserved communities, in opportunity and empowerment zones. So it's a really, really innovative package that is just designed to rethink how we grow food in the future.
Tell us a little bit more about this technology. How are you able to reduce 35 acres to an acre?
So it's vertical farming. So in case you're not familiar, vertical farming is just again, what it sounds like. It's very, very basic. It's instead of working with square feet, you're working with cubic feet, right? So most farmland, most greenhouses out there are what we call flat tray greenhouses, and they work on one plane, right? With vertical farming, you go up. So our towers are 18 feet high. The greenhouses are usually around 24 feet high, but these towers are 18 feet high and they're in rows, and there's just thousands and thousands of plant spots, which we call them, on each of these towers altogether, right? So in an acre and a half, you have roughly 280,000 plant spots. And so that's how we're able to grow that much harvest, and then we're able to grow it quickly because of the way that water and nutrients and the environment are inside the greenhouse and around the plant spots, how they're able to give the plants exactly what they need when they need it, and these plants are optimized for growth.
Got it. And so you mentioned, a few examples of plants you can grow. Can you grow any plant in this setting or only specific plants?
So we can grow commercially viable. That means, so I'll back up. You can grow hundreds of different varieties of plants within our system. But what we are really interested in is commercially viable plants, because we want these greenhouses to be economic units, right? That are profitable in and of themselves, which is probably another big difference with some of the other platforms out there. Is there's no return on investment. It's impossible with a time horizon to return that investment, that CapEx and the OpEx. Whereas ours, you have that opportunity because there's around 50 to 60 commercially viable plants, so leafy greens, spinach, kale, lettuce, all sorts of lettuce, chard, collard greens, arugula, and then onto herbs like basil and rosemary and thyme, and then even strawberries. So there's a variety of things that you can grow there, but we really want to make sure that what you can grow is going to make you financially successful as a business that owns one of these things.
That's really interesting because I think some of the other companies I found didn't have that, like you said. Is that the case? Like, you guys are the only company that is focused on sort of giving people a return on investment from going after this venture?
As far as we know of, we're the only company that's focused on that, and really the only company that is really more entrepreneurial, empowering entrepreneurs like that, right? So you've got a number of other competitors like Aero Farms, Bright Farms, Freight Farms, Bowery up there in the Northeast, but they're all interested in either with some of the larger ones, they're interested in owning all of that, and they just want to sell you the produce, right? And then with Freight Farms, wonderful concept. They're growing in shipping containers. But the reality is, because it's grown in a shipping container with lights, with all that CapEx in there, the ROI is almost impossible to ever gain. So as far as we know, we're the only ones that are empowering entrepreneurs to take these things, make them into economic units, make them into businesses, whether they're social enterprises or whether they're pure for-profit, and then go and grow. Also, too, for nonprofits, there's an opportunity to take these things and tell your donors, right? Hey, here's a one-time investment that once we build this, it will employ up to 30 people, and you can sell the offtake, the harvest, for profit to break even. You can sell it subsidized to give more, have nutritious food more accessible to the community around you, or you can do some sort of social enterprise where it's a hybrid of both, right? But if you create the platform to give them all sorts of options on revenue, all sorts of options on plants, all sorts of options on how many people work there, automation versus manual, that empowers them to have the flexibility to do a lot of different things with the platform, right? And that's where we're focused on.
Yeah, I think that's huge, especially because food insecurity is such a big problem in our country still. A lot of people don't realize that. One quick thing, I know you're based down in Dallas. Do you guys serve all over the country, or just regionally in the South, or?
No, we do. So we are a 3-year-old company, and in the past year is when we've really honed and perfected our technology. But we can sell these greenhouses to anyone, almost anywhere in the world, nationally, internationally. So if you've got an investor group or an entrepreneur-led investor group or a municipality that's interested in one of these, they can absolutely set one up in their region.
Got it. So 3 years ago, when the founders started Eden Green, what inspired them to create Eden Green? What was the problem they were trying to solve? And then, did they come from this sort of background, or how did they come to create this?
So it's a fascinating and really heartwarming story. So 2 South Africans, Jacques and Eugene Van Buren, and they were feeding folks in their community in South Africa, and they had bounce houses and they were passing out candy, and this one kid came up to them and he took the candy from them and he stuffed his pockets. And they were like, hey, wait a second, there's more where this came from. You don't have to hoard. You can eat it. We'll give you more. And he said, well, it's actually my younger sister, my 3-year-old sister's at home, and it's not my day to eat. It's hers. And so I'm saving this for her. And that was just a gut punch to them of like, what are you talking? Like, what is this concept of your day to eat? I mean, that's a really, really just sad state of affairs. And so they're both engineers. And so they just took it upon themselves to research. One was a construction engineer. The other one was a mechanical engineer. Like, they just researched for the better part of 10 years how to create this, system. And it's not just, I mean, you think about it, it's not just these growing towers, it's everything around it. It's the water, it's the nutrients, it's the sunlight, it's the, how do you harvest? How do you plant? What are the control systems for that? Is it in a greenhouse? Is it in a controlled environment facility? Is it whatever it is? And so they did just some amazing work to get it to where it is today. So in 2017, 18, they brought it over to the States just because there was more opportunity for capital and more opportunity for innovation. And that's where it landed. We started operations here in 2018.
Wow, yeah, that is a very heartwarming origin story. And then talk about how Eden Green has evolved over time. I'm especially interested in how it's evolved over the last year. Obviously, COVID has impacted just about every business in different ways. How has COVID impacted, the food and farming industry and therefore your business?
I think it's a great story of while your mission remains the same, you have to pivot with either external factors or honestly internal as well, right? But when it started out, it was really, they were focused on perfecting the technology and then bringing it to the market in terms of providing their own private label. It was just like a lot of these others. Plenty is a good example of it. Plenty is vertically integrated from the technology to the distribution to the merchandising of the product in stores. That takes a lot of money for any startup founder who is roughly in any sort of supply chain space. To make something is difficult, to distribute it is difficult, and to merchandise and sell it is very difficult. To do all three of those things requires a lot of resources and quite a amount of time. And most startups are not funded and capitalized in that they can manage all three of those unless you cast just this unbelievable vision. So when it started out, they were really trying to tackle all three of those. And when I came on board at the end of 2019, I took a look at it and said, hey, and I come from a MarTech background. So the other company that I just recently sold is a digital ad agency. So I took one look at it and I said, hey, I love everything about the vision and the mission, but we have to focus. We have to go hedgehog style and be really, really good at one thing. And that one thing is going to be the tech. And if we can make our calling card on the patented technology and the execution of build with these greenhouses, combined with an economic unit that's profitable, I think that's a 10x better than anyone else out there. So that's where I had it focused since early 2020, late 2019. COVID hit, and so I come from a government background, and I just have been trained to look towards the future. And even back in March and April, I saw just that COVID was going to be bigger than what most people thought it would be. So our R&D facility, which is our current facility right now, we're building a commercial facility next to it. That's fully commercial production facility. But our R&D facility was still doing trials, but they weren't doing it in a way that was focused on feeding people around them. It was after the fact, right? So I said, hey, listen, there's going to be a shortage of food. Let's grow our trials. Let's do the tests. Let's run the tests, but let's turn this whole facility into just a food producing machine. Let's not stray focus from the tests, but they have to be the type of trials and tests that at the end result, you can have greens that people want to eat and that they'll want to eat in mass. And so that's what we did. We pivoted. We did our trials and our tests, but we really focused on the R&D facility after that on feeding folks around us. And I think to date, we've donated over 50,000 pounds of leafy greens to local food banks, churches, charities. There's even a local veggie project that's just educating people on what fresh vegetables actually taste like, how much better they are for you, how you can include them in your recipes, cooking at home. So that's how we've pivoted in COVID. But from a business perspective, our mission has remained unchanged. And that's, we know the future of food is going to be in this densely grown, closer to the urban environment type situation, where you're cutting down on the food supply chain from 2,000 miles to 20 miles to 2 miles. If that's the future, then that's what we need to be focused on.
For sure. You should actually team up with somebody that I had on the podcast before. He was one of my first episodes. He runs a foodfinder.us. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they basically help people find soup kitchens all around the country. And
that's great.
I think, so I don't know. There's got to be something that you guys can do together there to create more food and get more food out there. And then for people listening who maybe aren't as familiar with the issues surrounding food insecurity in the US, can you talk a little bit more about that? I don't know if you have stats off the top of your head, or just paint the picture for people that, they think, oh, food insecurity only happens in third world countries, not in America. Talk about why that's just not true and what reality actually is.
Yeah, the reality is that probably the vast majority of folks who are listening to this podcast live in a certain bubble, myself included, right? And you just have to call it out. And it's the bubble where you can get food delivered to you in a matter of hours, right? Either through restaurants or just through DoorDash or even the grocery stores are doing it, right? We are in a scenario where we have the opportunity to drive to 2 or 3 different grocery stores to get exactly what we need, right? We do it ourselves. There's the Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, in our town's Central Market route, right? And then you've got this vast sort of array of options before you when you get to each of those stores. Now you contrast that with honestly the majority of America, who they don't have the time, they don't have the wherewithal, the resources to go to 1, 2, 3 grocery stores. They certainly don't have the resources on a regular basis to get groceries delivered to them. So they're stuck going to the nearest grocery store, and the lower socioeconomic neighborhoods and the grocery stores within them are the last to get produce. They're the last to get the freshest stuff. All these distributors, they have their routes, and they're going to distribute unequally towards the grocery stores, towards the points of sale that generate more money. And it's just a part of capitalism. But the flip side of that is that our experience in our grocery stores is vastly different than the experience of folks in South Dallas in their grocery stores, of folks in Southeast DC in their grocery stores. It's just different. And then you have folks who have to go into bodegas to get their food, right? And it's just surely because they don't have a car. They take public transportation, and they're walking, and they may have been working a second shift, and so they pop into the 24-hour bodega, get what little they need, get an onion here, get some lettuce here, maybe get a lot of canned goods, a lot of processed foods, and it's because it's what they can afford, and it's not a knock on them. It's just their reality. So when you think about food deserts, even that is sort of a bit of a misnomer in my view. It sort of paints a distorted picture because there is food there, but it's processed. It's not the healthiest option. It's very limited in options, but they're getting they're taking what they can get. So you contrast that with where we are with a lot of the folks, myself, folks who are listening to this, and you can't even imagine trying to shop there in a bodega, or trying to shop in a local convenience store, or trying to shop in a lower end grocery store and come out with anything that's remotely healthy for your budget. And so that's the picture that is we're trying to paint, that's accurate in today's society here in America, not overseas, right here. And that's what we're trying to solve for.
For sure. And so talk a little bit, this season of the podcast is all about shaping the future with the technology that we're working on today. And so talk about how the technology that you have at Eden Green with the vertical farming, talk about, how this can shape our future in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Like in 10 years, where are we going to be with food insecurity, with getting fresh food to the grocery stores at an affordable price for everybody to have access to? Where are we going to be with that if we implement this new technology?
So there are a lot of different trends that are sort of all coming to one point. There's the trend of growing population, right? All around the world, U.S. included, our population is growing at a rate that, from a food production perspective, is unsustainable. We're not producing enough food to get to the people in time. So you've got that. You've got supply chains are more and more fragile because people are trying to shove more and more food through the same supply chain, and we're doing it in such a way that's the context of that supply chain is the pandemic. The context of that supply chain is changing weather patterns, right? So, for instance, Salinas Valley, California, supplies the vast majority of leafy greens, romaine lettuce, to the United States. Well, they had a warmer than average summer, a warmer than average fall, and they also had a virus infection that kind of ran through the valley within the romaine lettuce. Well, what that resulted in was that the Chipotles and the Whole Foods here and on the East Coast ran out of romaine lettuce, like that, and that's just a rando weather pattern. That's not even including the pandemic. So all of a sudden you're introducing these weather patterns to the traditional farming that's just for one reason or another can totally decimate the end user's ability to buy romaine lettuce. Then you track in the pandemic, you have any sort of natural disasters, and the supply chains shut down. They're super fragile, and so you lose accessibility. Well, you also lose consistency, right? Which is kind of the second piece. You have to have accessible food for everyone. You have to have consistent food for everyone. Well, one natural like climate event can totally ruin a harvest. So with a regular farm, you're getting 3 harvests, 2 harvests. You're not, maybe up to 6, right, in a natural setting, especially with some of the other leafy greens. But one natural event wipe out a harvest. Well, there's one whole harvest. There's 3 to 6 months worth of food right there. And so there's not a consistency factor in our food supply for this growing food population, remember? And then the last thing is safety. When those two first things go down, suppliers and distributors rush food through the system. They cut corners. The USDA, the FDA inspectors are overwhelmed. They've got less of them out there because of the pandemic, and they've got more food pumping into the system. Mistakes will be made. Corners are cut because profit margins have to be hit, and you get unsafe food in the system. So safety, consistency, and accessibility, all of those can be redefined in terms of locally grown food. If you're locally grown, you can have, it's right there. It's not 2,000 miles away. It's 20 miles away, 2 miles away. If it's locally grown, if it's right there, and you are in using a technology like ours and greenhouses like ours, you get 11 harvests a year. So it's consistently fresh. Every week we're harvesting the produce. Every week it's going out from our facilities to the grocery stores. And then lastly, because we have a culture of food safety in our company, you're getting the safest greens. You're getting stuff that's not contaminated by things in the water because we have an unbelievable water filtration system. You're not getting things contaminated by the air because it's all enclosed and we control the environment. You're not getting things, that are contaminated by the ground. These farms, I've seen recalls on farms, not due to anything the farmers were doing, but due to runoff from farms and cattle lots around them. that are running into the ground. So there's things they can't even control below the ground with groundwater, as well as above with contaminants in the air that we can control for. So all of a sudden we've redefined locally grown with as consistent, accessible, and safe by using our technology.
That's awesome. That is so cool to think about how we can solve a lot of really big problems. And this goes to the core of, I mean, if you want to talk this is the core of like survival, is having food to eat. So we're really solving like the most basic human problem that we need to survive. So that is super cool and super exciting. So Eddy, I want to talk a little bit more about your background in the startup world. You have a pretty interesting background. You've actually been the founder of several companies. You've served on the board. I think this is your first foray into being a CEO at a company. But one thing I found interesting is that you actually left. You were a founder of a company, Bootstrap, that you mentioned earlier that you sold. And then now you're working at Eat & Green. Did you sell your company before you came to Eat & Green, or did you actually leave your job at the company that you started in order to work at another company?
So it is an interesting story, and I will just preface it by saying none of this story is possible without a great team built around you, without a team built and a company built on core values of trust and empowerment and transparency, and then honestly without a great business partner and co-founder. So my business partner over there, his name's Cameron Gawley, and he just turned 40 today. So happy birthday, Cameron. But he and I started the business in 2010, and we saw a need in the marketplace. We saw the product market fit, and we saw that we had a speed to market that no one else had. And this was in just fulfilling, back in 2010, what digital ads meant and digital presence in the world. Most of the marketing companies that were out there were traditional TV, print, and radio, and they bolted on websites, right? They bolted on a website development shop, or they bolted on SEO, or they bolted on social media. There's no one thinking about it holistically. And every time we thought about it and communicated holistically, people's eyes would light up, right? You have to come work with us. You have to come help us think through this stuff. So that's how we started the business in 2010. And I told my staff on the last staff meeting that I was on a month ago, I just said, hey, listen, I didn't start this company to own it. Everything that I have gotten, we talk about our God-given gifts and abilities. Well, that it is that for me. They're gifts. Right? And the gifts aren't meant to be hoarded. The gifts are meant to be shared. And anything coming out of my gifts of intellect or strategy or leadership, those themselves are derivative gifts, and they're meant to be shared, not hoarded. So I said, I went into this company not wanting to really own it, but to be a good steward of the gift and the derivative gift that it was. So, I just wanted to be a good steward of it for however long I was supposed to be a steward of it. And fast forward to 2016, we had grown this company from scratch. We bootstrapped it. No loans, no lines of credit, easiest cap table in the world. It was me and Cameron. And we had a chance to sell it because we both thought, here's a company that could steward it better than we could and help it grow and take it to the next level. Turned out not to be the case. I think vision was just misaligned, and we bought it back 11 months later. Yes. And it was a great buyback story. We came out very well. I'll just put it that we came out very well on the end of that buyback. And so we had a chance to start it over again, and we had a chance to do BuzzShift 2.0, and we did it. And within 90 days, it was back up and running, profitable, even better than before. So at that time, I really started taking a step back, and Cameron and I had both taken a step back and said, hey, how would we do this differently? But also, how would we do life differently, right? What would we focus on if we could turn this into and steward this well enough to that where it becomes, an investment, right? A true investment. And so we had a couple of years to think about that. And one of the things to think about is when you're a startup founder, it's really hard to let go. but because you are the business. But as soon as you go from employee to operator, it's a mindset shift that you'll never go back to. Once you're an operator or even a manager, you never just want to go back to being an employee. It's the same. It's another jump to go from operator to owner. That mindset shift, never go back. And if you do, you're kicking and screaming, right? And then go from owner to investor is probably the last jump. And the owner and investor, all of those plateaus, if you will, or those stages require less and less control. And most people get stuck. Most founders get stuck in the owner mentality. They have to have control. They have to have control of operations, sales, finance, all that good stuff. As soon as you jump out as an investor in that mindset, the quicker you can do that, the quicker you want to build a team to just like, hey, you take all this. I want to oversee it. I want to have less control. And the good teams that grow, the good companies that grow are because the CEO or the founders have either stepped aside, right, to let someone else grow that thing, and they become advisors and investors, or they go to their next thing, or the founders stay on board, but they've learned internally to become investors in their own business, right? And so for me, over the course of that year from 2017 to 2019, I just had an opportunity to do that, to take a step back and say, okay, if I could picture myself as an investor in something, in this baby that I grew from scratch, but if I could take a step back and be an investor, what would I want to do? And fortunately, this opportunity came up as a result of me sharing with my friends and colleagues, like, hey, I think my role here at BuzzShift is changing and is transitioning to more of an investor owner, right? I want to be involved. I have a vested interest in how well the company is run and how it grows, but I think my role is changing. And so, I talked about it with my business partner, and slowly over time, we built up this leadership group and this team that allowed me and honestly him to take a little further step back. And when we took the further step back, for me at least, I found that I had the resources and the bandwidth to say, okay, what's next? And Eden Green was next.
Wow. What a story. I actually don't think I've ever talked to somebody who has sold their company and then bought it back. Like, obviously I knew that was a thing that could potentially happen, but I just haven't personally known anybody that's done that. What a crazy story. I mean, I wish we had all day because I'd want to hear that full story, but we'll have to get that from you some other, yeah.
The coda to that story is we just sold it again a month ago. And so I'm completely
not to the same company. Not to
no.
Okay.
That would have been a horror story. Come on, Diana. But no, we sold it to a great company called Blue Cypress out of New Orleans. It's actually a family of companies, and Amit, their CEO, is a wonderful guy. But we sold it to them. Cameron has stayed on as CEO. And our managing director, we were able to empower and really reward our managing director to take a bigger role. And then I took a total step out. And to me, to the epilogue to that story is Amit and Cameron and that team are at the very least as good of, but probably better stewards of BuzzShift from this point on than I could ever be. And so I had sort of the wisdom and the wherewithal to let that go and say, man, there's someone else, there's a group of people that can be a better steward of this company than I can. I want to see that grow. I want to see that team succeed. And it's just not going to be under my watch. And I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, that's so I guess going off of that, what would be your biggest piece of advice for somebody who is a founder of a company and trying to decide where to take the company? They're kind of at a crossroads. They've grown the company. It's going well, but they're at a crossroads. Like, do I keep doing this forever or do I sell the company? What's sort of like your number one piece of advice for a founder who's at that crossroads and at a loss for what to do next?
I think they have to ask themselves very honestly, what do they want? And I think they probably need a group of advisors, close colleagues. It doesn't have to be a formal group of board of advisors, but 2 or 3 guys and gals who can just ask them honestly, hey, what do you want? And for them to be able to answer that honestly. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders cannot answer that honestly because they're just so focused on this baby that they've built. And they think their identity is wrapped up in it. And in some ways that's healthy because they've built that, but in some ways it's not healthy. My comment or my advice to them is 1, tell people what you really want, and 2, begin with the end in mind. And I know I hope so, that in my obituary or in my funeral service where someone, my wife or my kids or my friends are standing up and talking about me, I hope they don't mention BuzzShift. I hope they don't mention Eden Green, because if that's the extent of my identity and what I'm known for, I don't think I've made a dent enough in the world, right? I have to be known for something more. My identity should not be in these companies. My identity is in something much greater, much higher, much more human. So if you begin with that end in mind of, I don't want that to be on my headstone. I don't want any of my company names to be on my headstone. And by the way, I have never seen a headstone that had a company name on there. It was always beloved father, beloved husband, beloved friend, whatever, right? Not a company name. So if that's not going to be on your headstone, what is going to be on your headstone? That's where you start. And if you can work backwards from there, that automatically, if you can get that from your 18 inches from your head to your heart, you will be able to let go of that thing and say, man, how can the team grow this? And how can I get out of the way as fast as possible so that it doesn't overtake my life and it's not the end all be all of my life?
Yeah, I love that. I think so many founders do get wrapped up in their startup as their life, and I think that's only normal, because when you start
Absolutely
a company,
normal.
It is your life. It's all consuming. So how can you not? But
that's a season, and that shouldn't be your identity, right?
Right. Yeah. So going off of that, tell people a little bit more about who Eddy is outside of work. We've already gotten to sort of get into your mind a little bit, like hear your philosophy a little bit, but tell people more about who you are outside of work. What are your hobbies? What do you like to do? Any random, interesting, fun facts about yourself?
So let's see. So I've been married for 20 years, and if the videos, people looking at the video of this, they'll see me and they don't know how I'm married 20 years because I don't look like I'm old enough to be married 20 years. But
I was going to say, yeah, I wouldn't have got, you don't look like you're old enough to be married 20 years.
Diana, you and I both know it's the Asian genes. It's great.
It's
right?
true. You probably think I'm like a high schooler interviewing you.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're together on this. So married for 20 years, have 3 kids. So I've got a 16-year-old daughter, 11-year-old son, 7-year-old daughter. And really, I mean, that's my world, is my relationship with my wife and my kiddos. I've got a great community around me. I've been fortunate, as you mentioned from the background. I've had time in Washington, D.C., working in foreign policy in the Middle East. I was a President Bush's Asian American spokesperson for 2 years. I've worked in multiple startups. So I have this unbelievable network of friends that I think is probably what I'm best renowned for, is my ability to land in any city and to have a friend there that knows me well, and that's just on a brother sister level, right? So that's me in a nutshell. Like I am an entrepreneur. I'm a serial entrepreneur. So there's not a lot of other things outside of that. I play a horrible game of golf, but other than that, it's what you see is what you get. Here's what I will say is, Cameron and I, and I've included it in my work in Eden Green, but very early on in my entrepreneurial career, we decided that we weren't going to work on weekends. We weren't going to check emails past 7 p.m. and we weren't going to hit up emails starting until 7 a.m. And what that did was that it just allowed us margin, and the margin to travel, the margin to pursue nonprofits. Like I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Seed Effect that engages in microfinance and then savings groups in the refugee camps in northern Uganda and South Sudan. Like things I wouldn't even dreamed of being involved in. I took my kids, my family. I renovated an Airstream. I gutted it, renovated it just from studs up, and we went and did a month-long trip of the Western states, California and back. It just created all sorts of margin by setting those boundaries that I had talked about. And I really think that has helped me with my identity, right? Because I'm not wrapped up in my business. It's very important to me. My businesses and my investments are very important to me, but they're not my life. My life is so much more than that. It's my friends around me. I think one of the things locally, like just among my friend group that I'm known for, is we have front porch fires. And we've just got a nice front porch, and I've got what's called a solo stove, and it's a really great fire pit that produces little to no smoke. And on Friday nights or on Saturday nights, usually on a weekly basis, I'll be sitting out there, my wife will be sitting out there, and the fire it's just like moths to a flame. Like our friends, like I'll just send a text out, hey, front porch fire's going right now. Or I'll just send a picture of the solo stove, and it's people like, I'm coming on over. And so we just have this community that we've built because of these front porch fires. And our neighbors are great friends of ours. They've all got kids our age. And so it's just this great, great, great community. Cannot be done if you don't have that type of margin. And so that's what, personally I want to be known for, is a guy who's just trying to follow Jesus. He has a faith, and he's just trying to love people around him by lighting up front porch fires and drinking whiskey. And
that's awesome. I love that. I love that idea. Front porch fires. You should like write a book, or I don't know if you have a blog online or something, but you got to write these thoughts down.
People have told me that. I just can't get around to it yet. That's the margin thing that I'm trying to work on, right? I need to make up margin to write, but I appreciate that. It's been a great calling card for me, right?
Hire somebody to ghostwrite these things for you. Just have them listening to these podcast interviews that you do and ghostwrite articles for you. You gotta get it out there somehow, is all I'm saying.
I will.
All right. Well, to wrap up, Eddy, I've got two quick, just rapid fire, fun, random little questions for you. The first one is, if you were stranded on a desert island with only one other person, who would you want that to be? It can be somebody dead or alive. I'm going to exclude your wife and kids from this, so I'm not going to make you choose who your favorite child is. So anybody besides your wife and kids, one person, dead or alive, who would you choose?
There's an author named Neil Stephenson, and he's written some of my favorite books. Cryptonomicon is one. And there's another trilogy. He's written a ton of books. He's sort of like historical sci-fi, but he's just a polyglot. Like he knows a lot about everything. And if I had to be stranded on a desert island, I would just want to have a lot of conversations about everything, if that's what we could do besides swimming and whatever. So Neil Stephenson.
Awesome. Love it. I'll have to check him out. And then last question, if you could go back and redo college knowing what you know now, what is one thing that you would do differently?
Oh man, that is hard. I wouldn't have taken it so seriously. I know now that the hardest thing to do is to get into college. Once you're in, you're in. Very few people. I don't check GPAs unless, there's room for that, right? There's permission for that to check GPAs. But at the most basic level, I'm not checking GPAs when I interview someone or I hire someone. I'm checking them for character, for values, for experience, right? I want to see where they went to school, but I certainly don't need to see what grades they made. So knowing that, I probably would have taken it less seriously. I would have passed, right, obviously, and gotten A's and B's, but it was just, I think there's and maybe it's the Asian background. Like my parents are just high level success, academic success, that I probably would have dialed it down just not a lot, just a little bit, and enjoyed college a little bit more. And I had a ton of fun in college. Don't get me wrong. I had a ton of fun in college. I could have just dialed it down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. Well, before you go, Eddy, this has been great. Thank you so much for being here. Tell people where they can find you if they want to connect with you personally, and also where they can learn more about Eden Green.
So Eden Green, social handles, Eden Green Tech, and then the URL is just edengreen.com, EDEN green.com. Me personally, you can look up Badrina.com is probably the hub of all things Eddy, and that's just my last name, Badrina.com. I'm on some social, not really active, but yeah, Badrina.com is where you can find. Hopefully, you'll find more blog posts, like you're saying, soon.
Yes, please give the people what they want. You got to spread, as you said, you can't hoard what you've got, right? You got to spread it. You got to share it. So, all right. Well, thanks, Eddy. We'll include all the links in the show notes so people can click through to it easily. Thank you again, Eddy, for being here. This was really fun conversation. Learned a lot. Listeners, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll be back again soon with another episode of Startup Happy Hour.